Sign of 4 by Arthur Conan Doyle. Sherlock Holmes took the bottle from the corner of the mantelpiece, and with his hypodermic syringe from its neat morocco case. With his long, white, nervous finger, he adjusted the delicate needle and rolled back his left shirt cuff. For some little time his eyes rested thoughtfully upon the sinewy forearm and wrist, all dotted and scarred, with the innumerable puncture marks. Finally he thrust the sharp point home, driving down the tiny piston, and sank back into the velvet-lined armchair with a long sigh of satisfaction. 3 times a day for many months I had witnessed this performance, but custom had not recoiled my mind to it. On the contrary, from day to day I had become more irritable at the sight, and my conscience swelled nightly within me at the thought that I had lacked the courage to protest. Again and again I had registered a vow that I should deliver my soul upon the subject, but there was that in the cool, nonchalant air of my companion which made him the last man with whom one would care to take anything approaching to liberty. His great powers, his masterly manner, and the experience which I had had in his many extraordinary qualities, all made me difficult and backward in crossing him. Yet upon that afternoon, whether it was the bon which I had taken for my lunch, or the additional exasperation produced by the extreme deliberation of his manner, I suddenly felt that I could no longer hold out. "Which is it today?" I asked. "Morphine or cocaine?" He raised his eyes languidly from the old black-letter volume which he had opened. "It is cocaine," he said. "A 7% solution. Would you care to try it?" "No, indeed," I answered brusquely. "My constitution has not got over the Afghan campaign yet, and I cannot afford to throw any extra strain upon it." He smiled in vehemence. "Perhaps you are right, Watson," he said. "I suppose its influence is physically a bad one. I find it, however, so transcendently stimulating, and clarifying to the mind that its secondary action is a matter of small moment." "But consider," I said earnestly. "Count the cost. Your brain may, as you say, be roused and excited, but it is a pathological and morbid process which involves increasingly tissue change, and may at last leave a permanent weakness. You know, too, what a black reaction comes upon you. Surely the game is hardly worth the candle. Why should you, for mere passing pleasure, risk the loss of those great powers with which you have been endowed? Remember, I speak not only as one comrade to another, but as a medical man to whose constitution he is to some extent answerable." He did not seem offended. On the contrary, he put his fingertips together and leaned his elbows on the arms of his chair, like one who has to relish a conversation. "My mind," he said, "rebels at stagnation. Give me problems, give me work, give me the most abstruse cryptogram, or the most intricate analysis, and I am in my own proper atmosphere. I can dispense then with the artificial stimulants. But I abhor the dull routine of existence. I crave the mental exaltation. This is why I have chosen my own particular profession, or rather created it, for I am the only one in the world." "The only unofficial detective," I said, raising my eyebrows. "The only unofficial consulting detective," he answered. "I am the last and highest court of appeal and detection. When Gregson or Lestrade or Athenla Jones are out on their depth, why, by the way, is there no more state? The matter is laid before me. I examine the data, I am an expert, and pronounce a specialist opinion. I claim no credit in such cases. My name figures in no newspaper. The work itself, for the pleasure of finding a field of my particular powers, is its highest reward. But you have yourself had some experience in my methods of work, in the Jefferson Hope case. Yes, indeed, I said cordially. I was never so struck by anything in my life. I even embodied in a small brochure with a somewhat fantastic idea of the study in scarlet. He shook his head sadly. I glanced over it, he said. Honestly, I cannot congratulate you upon it. Detection is, or ought to be, an exact science, and should be treated in the same cold and unemotional manner. You have attempted to tinge it with romanticism. Which produces much the same effect as if you worked a love story or elopement into the fifth proposition of the lucid. But the romance was there, I remonstrated. I could not tamper with the facts. Some facts should be suppressed, or at least just sense of proportion should be observed in treating them. The only point in the case which deserved mention was the curious analytical reasoning of the effects of the causes, by which I succeeded in unraveling it. I was annoyed at his criticism of the work which had been specifically designed to please him. I confess, too, that I was irritated by the egotism which seems to demand that every line of my pamphlet should be devoted to his own special doings. More than once during the years that I had lived with him on the Baker Street, I had observed a small vanity underlaying my companion's quiet and didactic manner. I made no remark, however, but just sat nursing the wounded leg. I had had a Jezebel bullet go through it some time before, and though it did not prevent me from walking, it ached wearily at every change of the weather. My practice has extended recently into the continent, said Holmes, after a while, filling his old briar-boot pipe. I was consulted last week by Francois Leviard, who, you probably know, has come rather to the front lately in the French detective service. He has all the Celtic power of quick intuition, but he is deficient in the wide range of exact knowledge which is essential to the higher development of his art. The case was concerning with a will, and possessed some features of interest. I was able to refer him to the two parallel cases, one at Riga in 1857, and the other in St. Louis in 1871, which have suggested to him the true solution. Here is the letter which I had this morning acknowledging my assistance. He tossed over as he spoke a crumpled sheet of foreign notepaper. I glanced my eyes down, catching the profusion of notes in admiration, with a stray magnifique and coup de matre and tour de force, all testifying to the ardent admiration of the Frenchman. He speaks as a pupil to his master, said I. Oh, he rates my assistance too highly, Sherlock Holmes slightly. He has considerable gifts himself, but possesses two out of the three qualities necessary for the ideal detective. He has the power of observation and that of deduction. He is only wanting in knowledge, and that may come in time. He is now translating my small works into French. Your works? Oh, didn't you know? He cried, laughing. Yes, I have been guilty of several monographs. They are all upon technical subjects. Here, for example, is upon the distinction between the ashes of various tobaccos. Next enumerates 140 forms of cigars, cigarettes, and pipe tobacco, with colored plates illustrating the difference in the ash. It is a point which is continually turning up in the criminal trials, and which is sometimes of supreme importance as a clue. If you may say definite, for example, some murder has been done by a man who is smoking an Indian nuclear. It is obvious and narrows your field of search. To the trained eye, there is as much difference between the black ash and of the tripotphony and the white fluff of a bird's eye as there is between the cabbage and a potato. You have an extraordinary genius for minutity, I remarked. I appreciate their importance. Here is my monograph upon the tracing of footsteps, with some remarks upon the uses of plaster of Paris as a preserver of impresses. Here, too, is a little curious work upon the influence of trade upon the form of the hand, with lithographs of the hand in slaters, tailors, sailors, cork cutters, compositors, weavers, and diamond polishers. That is a matter of great practical interest to the scientific detective, especially in cases of unclaimed bodies, or in discovering the antecedents of criminals. But I weary you with my hobby. Not at all, I answered earnestly. It is of greatest interest to me, especially since I have had the opportunity of observing your practical application of it. But you spoke just now of observation and deduction. Surely the one to some extent implies the other. Why, hardly, he answered, leaning back luxurious in his armchair, and sending up a thick black wreath from his pipe. For example, observation shows me that you have been to the Wigmore Street post office this morning, but deduction lets me know that when you were there you dispatched a telegram. Right, said I. Right on both points. But I confess that I don't see how you arrived at it. Was it a sudden impulse upon my part, and have I mentioned it to no one else? It is simplicity itself, he remarked, chuckling at my surprise. So absurdly simple that the explanation is superlative. And yet it may serve to define some limits of observation and deduction. Observation tells me that you have a little reddish mold adhering to your instep. Just opposite the Wigmore Street office, they have taken up the pavement and thrown up some earth, which lies in such a way that it is difficult to avoid treading it in its entering. The earth of a particular reddish tint, which is found, as far as I know, nowhere else in the neighborhood. So much is observation. The rest is deduction. How then did you deduce the telegram? Why, of course, I knew that you had not written a letter, since I sat opposite you all morning. I see also that your open desk there has a select sheet of stamps and this thick bundle of postcards. What could you go into the post office for than to send a wire? Eliminate all other factors, and the one which remains must be the truth. In this case, certainly it is so, I replied, after a little thought. One thing, however, is, as you say, of the simplest. Would you think me impertinent if I were to put you some theories to a more severe test? On the contrary, he answered, it would prevent me from taking a second dose of cocaine. I should be delighted to look into any problem which you might have to submit to me. I have heard you say that it is difficult for a man to have any object in daily use without leaving the impress of the individuality upon it in such a way that a trained observer might read it. Now, I have here a watch which has recently come into my possession. Would you have the kindness to let me have an opinion upon the character or habits of its late owner? I handed him over the watch with some slight feeling of amusement in my heart, for the test was, as I thought, an impossible one. and I intended it as a lesson against the somewhat dogmatic tone of his occasional mused. He balanced the watch in his hand, hard gazed at the dial, opened the back, and examined the works, first with his naked eyes, and then with his powerful convex lens. I could hardly keep from smiling at his crestfallen face when he finally snapped the case and handed it back. There's hardly any data, he replied. The watch has been recently cleaned, which robs me of the most suggestive facts. You're right, I answered. It was cleaned before being sent to me. In my heart, I accused my companion of putting forward a most lame and impotent excuse to cover his failure. What data could he expect from an uncleaned watch? Though, unsatisfactorily, my research has not been entirely barren, he observes, staring up at the ceiling with a dreamy, lackluster eyes. The subject of your correction, I should judge that the watch belonged to your elder brother, who inherited it from your father. That you no doubt gather from the HW on the back. Quite so. The W suggests your own name. The date on the watch is clearly 50 years back, and the initials are as old as the watch, so it was made for the last generation. Jewelry usually descends to the eldest son, and he is most likely to have the same name as the father. Your father was, if I recall correctly, been dead many years. It has therefore been in the hands of your eldest brother. Right so far, I said. Anything else? He was a man of untidy habits, very untidy and careless. He was left with good prospects, but he threw away his chances and lived for some time in poverty with the occasional short intervals of prosperity. And finally, taking to drink, he died. That is all I can gather. I sprang from my chair and limped impatiently about the room, with considered bitterness in my heart. This is unworthy of you, Holmes, I said. I could have not believed you would have had descended to this. You have made inquiries into the history of my unhappy brother, and you now pretend to deduce this knowledge in some fanciful way. You cannot expect me to believe that you have read all of this from a plain old watch. It is unkind, and, to speak plainly, has a touch of charlatanism to it. My dear doctor, he said kindly, pray accept my apologies. Viewing the matter as an abstract problem, I had forgotten how personal and painful a thing it might be to you. I assure you, however, that I never knew that you had a brother until you handed me that watch. Then how in the name of all that is wonderful did you get all these facts? They're absolutely correct in every particular order. Ah, that is good luck. I can only say what was the balance of probability. I did not at all expect it to be accurate. But it was not quite a mere guesswork. No, I never guess. It is a shocking habit, destructive to the logical faculty. What seems strange to you is only because you do not believe or follow my train of thought. I observe upon the small facts which large inferences may depend. For example, I began by stating that your brother was careless. When you observe the lower part of the watch case, you notice that it was not only dinted in 2 places, but it was cut and marked from all over from the habit of keeping other hand objects, such as keys and coins, in the same pocket. Surely it is no great feat to assume that a man who treats a 50-guinea watch so cavalierly must be a careless man. Neither is it a far-fetched inference that the man who inherits one article of such value is pretty well provided for in other respects. I nodded to show that I followed his reasoning. It is very customary for pawnbrokers in England, when they take a watch, to scratch the number of the ticket with the pinpoint upon the inside of the case. It is more hardy, the label, and there is no risk of the number being lost and transposed. There are no less than 4 such numbers visible on the lens on the inside of the case. Inference that your brother was often in the water. Secondary inference that he had the occasional burst of prosperity, or he could not have redeemed the pledge. Finally, I ask you to look at the inner plate, which contains a keyhole. Look at the thousands of scratches around the keyhole, marks where the key had slipped. What sober man's key could have scored those grooves? But you will never see a drunkard's watch without them. He winds it at night, and he leaves these traces of his unsteady hand. Where is the mystery in all this? It is clear as daylight, I answered. I regret the injustice which I did you. I should have had more faith in your marvelous facility. May I ask whether you have any professional inquiry at foot on present at foot? None, hence the cocaine. I cannot live without brain work. What else is there to live for? Stand at the window here. Was ever such a dreary, dismal, unprofitable world? See how the yellow fog swirls down the street and drifts across the dun-colored houses. What could be more hopelessly prosaic and material? What is the use of having powers, Doctor, when one has no field upon which to exert them? Crime is commonplace. Existence is commonplace. And no quantities save those which are commonplace have any function upon earth. I had opened my mouth to reply to his tirade when, with a crisp knock, our landlady entered, bearing a card upon a brass salver. "A young lady for you, sir," she said, addressing my companion. Miss Mary Morstan, he read. I have no recollection of this name. Ask the little lady to step up. Miss Hudson? Don't go, Doctor. I should prefer that you remain.